I'm Deborah, the President of the National Youth Council of Ireland, and I would like to welcome you all here today to the launch of our review of the Youth Work Sector Response to Covid-19 Pandemic Report. I'm heartened to see that we have so many organisations represented, youth workers, volunteers and young people joining us here today for Minister O'Gorman to launch our report. We will hear from two young people giving us the youth perspective regarding their experience over the past 7 months in this changed world. Following that, our researchers will present the review, its findings, and answer some questions. So please drop your questions in the chat box. Then we will move to the official launch, which is being delivered by our very own Minister O'Gorman. And finally, we'll have some closing words delivered by our very own Mary Cunningham, CEO of the National Youth Council of Ireland. The decision to commission this work was taken back in May 2020 while we were in the midst of an emergency. Every youth organisation in the country was focused on not just the delivery of youth work, but on figuring out the new how to deliver youth work in the face of the challenges presented by COVID-19. It is at times like this that we focus on the doing, we make things happen, we meet needs, and we do all of this without the space or time to reflect on our practice. We get busy delivering what we need to deliver to our young people. And what can happen as we move further away from the chaos towards the calm, it becomes more difficult to reflect and remember what we actually achieved during the whirlwind. So this review set out to capture just that. What was achieved by this sector through great difficulty. This review allows us to pause and reflect on how we responded, how we adapted our delivery of youth work, and explores the limitations of working in this way. It invites us to take a step back to reflect. It's an opportunity to listen and learn, and further permits evidence-based planning as we adjust to living with COVID-19. The launch of this review is timely. We are now 7 months into this pandemic. What was an emergency, crisis, has now moved to an everyday existence. How we support our young people through this will leave lasting impacts, not just for those young people, but for our society. The evidence presented in this report will aid us in doing so. We've been busy in the doing, in our practice. We now must reflect, shape our policies and supports to deliver our best practice in a new landscape. During periods of crisis, we are tried, and true leadership is evidenced in how we meet the crisis. The youth sector has done just that. This report evidences flexibility, adaptability, and empathy, innovation, and creativity that is ever present in our sector. It also demonstrates the vast resilience within the sector. COVID-19 has impacted all of us in more ways than we are likely to ever realise. However, the impact on our young people is very different and wide-reaching from other age groups. Our young people are facing so many concerns regarding access to employment, returning to education, vilification, even for making friends in public, and social isolation. Also, it has identified that they carry huge anxiety about the future, their future, which is impacting their mental health and well-being. These concerns faced by our young people because of COVID-19 are unprecedented and will further compound and be compounded and lengthened with an impending recession. In addition, unfortunately, there is evidence of a widening of pre-COVID patterns of inequality. Those young people previously at risk are becoming more marginalised. There is also evidence of an increase in the risk of dropout from education because of remote distance learning, which is also extending to youth work as evidenced in this review. Our young people will be affected by an increase in parental or guardian stress and increased home life stress. And this is likely to persist as we face sustained high unemployment and the recession we now face into. Many of our young people are still actually facing the effects of the last recession on their social, emotional and educational development. Youth work has a core place in supporting our young people through these challenges and anxieties, providing them with respite from the weight of COVID-19, supporting them by aiding in improving their mental health and well-being, building skills and experiences they will benefit from now and later in life. Also, and likely most importantly, youth work plays a role in the development of resilience of our young people, which they will benefit from for the rest of their lives. And this is a key skill for us to continue to live with COVID-19. It is right now that youth work is most needed. There is a greater need for young people to have access to youth work support now more than ever. It's imperative that funding is provided to support the flexibility within the sector, the additional supports required for our young people, to tackle digital poverty and deliver digital training and explore improved blended models of youth work to ensure our youth workers and our young people are best equipped to benefit from youth work. I would quickly like to thank Mary Cunningham and her team at NYCI, in particular Mary Claire and her colleagues, who ensured the delivery of this work and for having the foresight to capture the work in what was such a tumultuous period. The delivery of this external independent review is timely as we accept COVID-19's presence in our lives for much longer than we had anticipated and must review our long-term plans to meet this. It's further timely in its delivery pre-budget decision-making, evidencing the importance of youth work in supporting our young people, even more now than ever. So the first thing we will do is ask Mercy Kamara to speak to us about the youth perspective. Mercy is 16 years old and she's just begun in her final year in Blakestown Community School in Dublin 15. She has attended her local youth group, which is the Blakestown and Mountain View Youth Initiative, for the past 3 years, and she said she would never have been so positively impacted or have as many great memories if it hadn't been for the care and support she received through youth work. Mercy will tell us about her youth group and how COVID-19 pandemic has affected it, the effect of lockdown on her and her friends, and how youth work has supported them during this time. Mercy.
Can you hear me? All right, grand. So basically before lockdown, we were all like used to like seeing each other like every day. We'd be able to go to group and we'd be able to join and come over and talk to our youth workers anytime that we needed support. And then we did loads of groups. We had Goshke, we learned how to bake, we had spa days and all, and we just did a lot of things like supporting each other, and they always checked on our mental health, so we felt like we could always go to any of our youth workers to talk to them. And then when lockdown came, like all of that was like completely changed. Like we had to like try and adapt to like the new, like going online, talking to them online, our little Instagram group chats and all, and even trying to do Zoom calls where like we ghosted them, I'm not gonna lie, some of the times, but we all got to see each other online, and they put as much effort as they put into seeing us physically as they did interacting online and all, and we all seen the effort of it, and that's why all of us like care deeply about BMYI. And we're able to talk about like the diversity here as well. It's incredible. Like you'd never feel like different or ashamed to say anything, and they're just like so accepting, and you learn so much about that here as well. And another thing, I would literally have failed maths if it wasn't for this youth group. I'm not going to joke. Like they're so amazing for like supporting us with education and all, and going from doing classes and doing grinds and coming to see them to doing online was really challenging, and even just to be able to do school online as well was extremely challenging. But Roisin, one of the youth workers here, made it extremely easy and fun. Like she gave us like texted us and made sure that we were getting some of the work done, and I just found that like so good for the circumstances that we were in. And it was also really challenging to like adapt to like not being able to come here all the time, and the impact of that was like on our social lives as well, because we had always had something to do. Like we'd be in school and be like, are you going group on Thursday? Yeah, I'm going group on Thursday. And we'd be so like happy and delighted to come in, and being told that we can't do that anymore was like, it was like heartbreaking at some point. Like we were, okay, maybe like the 3 weeks we can deal with that, but after a while we're like, oh, I actually miss being down there and all of that. And as well, another bit of the challenges were not being able to finish our Goshka, and we were doing really well on it, and then we had to stop. We had our first aid training, we had certificates, and we still have that coming, and we're really happy about that. And yeah, most of the time I will call Quiva and she'd check up on us anytime during lockdown to check how our mental health and everything was going, and I found that like so good. You never noticed how important being in a youth group was until like you'd stop going. And I just think that's so important for young people as well, because it'd be really hard for me to be in school without having a youth group. I don't think my experience would be the same, honestly. Everything that like I've learned and like with friendship and everything has come from here. So I give it to them for that.
Thank you, Mercy, for that. I think it's interesting how you mentioned that the connection that you had there with your youth worker supported you in achieving your education. but also that you really miss the physical presence of being together. I think we all know and identify that Zoom just can't, or any of their online things can't quite replace that. Callum is next up. Callum is an 18-year-old student. You can all wish him happy birthday. He had his birthday just last weekend. And he is from Ballybrickin in County Limerick. He's an active advocate for sustainable development, climate and social justice at a local, national and international level. Since COVID-19 came into our lives, Callum has focused on the direct impact he could have on the most vulnerable in his community, while also moving all of his advocacy efforts onto the digital stage. Thank you, Callum.
Thank you very much, and thank you NYCI for having me the opportunity to speak today. So as young people, we depend on adults for many things in our lives. And my motto during COVID was that through COVID, it was an opportunity for us as young people to step up in our communities and to support those who are most vulnerable. A quick story, I remember sitting in double English, last two classes on, I think it was Thursday, March 12th. And we just started our new novel, I think it was Room at the time, which is around isolation, which was a coincidence when we look back at it. But I remember in unison, everyone's phone around the school going off when it was our teacher at the time, Leo Varadkar, put out the announcement that we were going into a full-scale lockdown. And I remember instantly my mind switched to what I could do for my community due to the amazing experiences and the values instilled in me through youth work. And I was instantly inspired to take actions for those who most needed it in my community. So it all started as a simple Facebook post I put up on my own Facebook page, and from that it was shared to community groups around Limerick and around Ballybrickin. It was then spread around the country, and from there it spread globally. Where I actually ended up speaking with our United Nations Secretary General Envoy on Youth about the impact young people can have on their own communities. So what it was that I just offered my support to those who are most vulnerable. I typed up a simple presentation slide, and I wanted to be as sustainable as possible because that's one of my main values, of being sustainable with everything we do. So I printed out as minimal posters as I could. But most of my work was through social media, and offered that any little jobs people had, or even if people wanted to just stop in for a chat, because it's hard at this time that I'd be willing to. I'm lucky enough that I have a nice bike, and that my parents got me a nice bike a few Christmas back. So I was able to get out of the house and cycle around and help people. In Ballybrickin, which is in County Limerick, I'm lucky to be a part of an amazing scout group with so many dedicated scouts and scouters. And we support the community in many different ways, much before COVID. And through this, we kind of came together in a collective action to help our community, and through the Scout Law, serve our community. And although I didn't get many direct requests for help, it was incredible to see how many messages I got from HSE workers, older members, family members, and friends around my community who wanted to come together in the collective fight to help those most vulnerable in this time, and come together and create a more connected community in this time of literal isolation. And through that, the online advocacy efforts kicked in. I was lucky enough that over the past year I've had some incredible opportunities to speak to some incredible people on important issues like climate justice, social justice, and so many other things. So although I found COVID quite hard, and I found school and online schooling quite hard, as we all sat behind our computers worrying about the news and the awful losses to many, I tried to spread the message of using this negative situation that we've been placed in and we have no control over, to bring about positive change. And I did this by using the story that was picked up to spread the message that young people are here to lead in the fight for COVID, that we're here to support. And then from that I did some webinars with some different bodies like World Scouting and even with NYCI, to try and spread the message that young people are here, and to try and help young people and to inspire them to take action in their own communities. So I suppose on that note, as we lead into Budget 2021. And I see we have Minister Roderic O'Gorman, who I've been lucky to meet online on an online space before, is that we not only as NYCI, as youth workers, but as the young people on the ground, we're calling on you to bring about the additional 4.7 million in youth services to meet the needs of the growing youth population and to strengthen the capacity of our incredible volunteer organisations who have been an absolute pillar for young people and for our communities. So thank you very much for having me, and thanks to Asa.
Thank you very much, Cal. That is great words there from yourself. I think one of the things you did there was kind of highlight that youth work is not just for the benefit of the individual young person, but that it actually instills in our young people to actually step in and do what they can to improve society in that. And of course, I suppose improve society and that. What we'll do is we'll just move on to presenting the research itself, and I will introduce you to our researchers, Deborah, Erwin and Lorraine Thomas. They conducted this independent research on behalf of NYCI, and both Deborah and Lorraine are professionally qualified youth work practitioners with almost 40 years combined experience of youth work and youth service management, primarily in the community and voluntary sector. Both of them have worked in a range of youth work settings up until 2015 when they chose to move into consultancy. Since then, they have delivered a range of strategic reviews and research for various clients, including the Centre for Children's Rights at Queen's University Belfast, Youth Work Alliance, Ballyfermot Youth Service, Trinity Youth Service, and now the National Youth Council of Ireland. During the presentation, the chat will be over, the Q&A will be open, so if you have any questions, please drop them in there. Now I'll hand over to Deborah and Lorraine.
Thank you. It's really, really good to be with you this afternoon, and we welcomed the opportunity to conduct the review of the youth work sector response on behalf of NYCI. Today we're going to briefly share with you our methodology and some of our findings, and then some of our recommendations that are laid out in the report. But first of all, can I just pay a big thank you to everyone who took the time to fill out the online survey, and to the professionals who engaged in our interviews. We really appreciated your insight and reflections on your experiences. And then we're really grateful to the young people who participated in our focus groups, especially at a time when Zoom fatigue had understandably set in. So we really do thank you for taking the time to participate in the research. The methodology that we undertook, the research was looking at 3 questions around how the sector has responded to the challenges, what methodologies have been used, and then the limitations experienced, particularly through the period of 12th of March to the 12th of June when we were in lockdown. While the main focus wasn't to look at the impact of the pandemic on young people, that did emerge, and so we have included insights on that in the report, and we've also included a section on adapting to the future. And so the methodology that we undertook, we did do research, and we looked at some of the emerging research already carried out within Europe and Ireland and the UK, and then we also scoped the websites and the social media output by NYCI organisations, member organisations. The online survey attracted 256 valid responses, and we interviewed 15 professionals from the sector, youth workers, programme managers and CEOs. And then we facilitated 5 focus groups. 2 of those focus groups were in one organisation, so it represented 4 organisations. So I'm just going to take you through a few of the survey findings, but you'll be able to read them all in the report. We asked survey respondents to indicate if they were able to continue providing service during the stay-at-home period, and then we also asked for approximate numbers they were working with prior to the pandemic and then during lockdown. So 14% weren't able to provide a service during lockdown, And this equated to around 6,900 young people. There were many reasons for this, and those reasons included not having the adequate digital infrastructure within the organisation, the closure of buildings, and then staff being reluctant to use digital options. 59% experienced a reduction in the number of young people they engaged with, and this represented a 70% drop, which is quite significant. So from 59,822 young people to 18,391. So that is significant. There were many challenges to engage in young people. Some were reluctant to go online, and 68% of respondents indicated this. At risk and marginalised young people were, as always, particularly isolated and difficult to engage. And 1 in 4 projects found that young people didn't have adequate digital access. And similarly then, 24% found staff lacked digital skills. I'm going to hand over to Deborah now, who's going to go through some of the qualitative findings for us.
Yeah, so just to give you an overview of the responses or our findings to the 3 kind of core research questions, the way in which we would characterise the broad kind of response of the youth work sector is one of proactive availability. And, you know, as one youth worker was saying to us, they were getting the message out to young people, to parents, to families. Our normal programmes aren't running as they would be in normal times, but we're still here. And so that's what we heard time and again. And we also observed how there was a real attentiveness to young people's emotional health and well-being, and that was coming across, and not just in their interviews and focus groups, but also we could see that in terms of the social media kind of output that organisations were putting out there. And there was also very much a listening and learning attitude from the sector. You know, there were a number of organisations that carried out their own research and surveys, you know, just to get a sense of what young people's needs were. In terms of the second question, the methodologies that were used to deliver services, there was an incredible range and depth to what organisations did to support young people, and all sorts of you know, different kinds of engagement online and different kinds of online spaces, and also good old-fashioned, you know, text and phone calls, and so very kind of direct contact. There were some organisations that were still able to maintain some outreach work, you know, within social distancing, public health guidelines, and just a lot of creativity, things like food hampers, activity packages, positivity packs. Those were a big thing, and could see how youth organisations, you know, were really using those not just to meet specific needs, but also to engender a sense of kind of community and, you know, that availability. We were also impressed when we heard of a few organisations who were actually able to establish new groups. For example, there was an organisation that managed to get 2 new music groups up and running online for guitar lessons, and they had met young people through detached work, and they delivered some guitars directly to the young people, and then the groups met online, and so that really is quite something. It's really impressive. So in the report we highlight some good examples of good practice, just to kind of give a flavour of some of the things that were going on, and there's some really impressive stuff that happened. So then the third question was around what are the limitations of working in this way, and there were many limitations. You know, some young people simply weren't comfortable with online engagement, and there were many issues around digital access and connectivity, so particularly in terms of rural broadband access, or, you know, families that simply, you know, they're young people who may not have a smartphone, and so that they were simply unable to engage, or maybe lacking enough credit to get online to engage. Also, one of the things that we heard a lot from youth workers was frustration around the different way of working, of being online with young people, and not being able to respond in the moment, and not being able to kind of see where something is not quite right with a young person and they may need extra support, and that whole dynamic was very different. So then moving on to some more of our findings. There was a lot of learning that came through as we heard from the youth workers and the young people. It was clear that there were a number of factors that enabled some organisations to respond effectively, whether that was having ICT kind of infrastructure in place already that enabled kind of remote working, and enabled organizations just to make that shift to working from home overnight, to a number of organizations that their local links in the local community, that those established relationships really paid off, and some were able to link in with statutory services to offer supports in the midst of the pandemic. And also, many organizations were receiving, support and guidance from externally, and, the department and NYCI, and, help such as the roadmap that NYCI produced. All of that was really valuable and made a difference. But of course, there were many key challenges that projects were facing. Not least the fact that, as one youth worker put it, it wasn't just the fact that we were working from home and everything was different. It was the fact that we were working from home, trying to do our jobs in the middle of a global crisis. And so that was really huge, alongside, desperately trying to make contact with young people, and just all the kind of anxiety that kind of went with that. But there's some really kind of key lessons and unexpected outcomes for youth organisations. Some were able to extend their geographical reach very effectively. We heard of one organisation that ran an online AGM, and that was usually it would be physically in Dublin, but with it being online, everybody from all over the country was able to participate. So, there was some really good stuff that happened, some, I suppose, not quite expected, but really began to contribute to some really good work in those organisations. But then, of course, we also came across a number of concerns for the future. The uncertainty is the big thing of just how things are going to play out. Particularly for smaller organisations, there were concerns around how can they be sure to be compliant. Where's the support for them to fulfil their kind of obligations to do things safely? So there are a number of concerns that youth workers and youth organisations were sharing. So if we go on to the next slide, I suppose when Lorraine and I kind of sat back and kind of reflected, what we could see was that the pandemic really exposed a range of inequalities and exacerbated, the vulnerabilities that are experienced by many young people. And so obviously digital poverty and digital access was huge. So one of the youth workers was saying to us, it was those most at risk who were most disconnected during the pandemic. And young people in specific kind of situations, for example, LGBTQ plus young people, who maybe, some may not have been actually out to their family, but they were confined to their family home. And so that sense of isolation was really a big deal. And we were talking to some youth workers who could see the mental health of some young people really kind of spiraling down. And then, also say, young people with specific kind of disabilities, just the removal of their kind of normal opportunities to engage with peers, all of that kind of was suddenly not there. And so there are a lot of kind of key challenges for many young people. So all of this really emphasized the importance of face-to-face youth work. And there was a youth worker who was saying to us about the Zoom sessions that they operated with young people with intellectual disabilities, families were saying to them, these Zoom sessions, that this is what's getting us through, so time and again in different ways, it was clear just how important youth work is and the contribution it makes. So what we saw was, as has already been said, there was so much adaptation, creativity, innovation, just the responsiveness to need, the availability. What we heard from youth workers was their commitment. That was very clear to young people and to seeking the best for young people. And we could see how they stepped into the gap, and even those who weren't comfortable with the online world or the digital world were, becoming as au fait as possible with all these different kind of platforms, trying to really get up to date in terms of security issues and how they could make things work for young people. But all of this came at a very significant cost for youth workers themselves and for organizations. So, as one, we've included a quote there from a CEO, essentially we've busted a gut here and we've done what we've had to do, but it hasn't been a good time. It's been tough, and there can be a certain amount of adrenaline that kind of goes with that. And some youth workers were saying, it was just constant, it was just go, 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 and you kind of look back and you forget about how much you've done, but that does come at a cost in terms of exhaustion and the kind of stress and anxiety, particularly for those very vulnerable young people. The whole transition to working from home, there were all of those kind of challenges. So yes, it was brilliant, but there's all these other things that kind of happened along with that. So I'll hand back to Lorraine.
So as I said earlier, there's a section looking at adapting for the future. And so Deborah's just said it there, that there was a lot of uncertainty. And I suppose looking at this now, we're in that moment where one CEO said it's like looking into a black hole. And in some ways we're in that black hole, but in that cases are rising now and youth workers are having to adapt continually to new restrictions, to new lockdowns. And so that was actually very insightful. But projects were determined that they would adapt, that they would follow government guidelines and observe social distancing and introduce all those boundaries that they needed to. There's a recognition that they need help and support to become COVID compliant, to improve their digital infrastructure and to develop digital practice. You'll also see in the report that we have a section on good practice examples. I'm not going to name any organisations now at the risk of leaving somebody out, but you can have a look there at some of the innovative and creative approaches that have been introduced. And just before we finish, I'm just going to outline some of the recommendations that were generated from the findings. First of all, there is a need to keep relationships central. Whether you are, some people started using the term digital youth worker, and I suppose it's about recognising we're youth workers and whether we're online or face-to-face, and that we should be using young person-centred approaches and that those are core to our work. In the middle of panic and overnight changes, it was maybe difficult to focus on that, but on reflection and moving into the future, that should be central. There's an importance to pay attention to the key transition points in the lives of young people, and some of the evidence was that it was difficult to engage that younger age group, specifically age 10 to 12-year-olds, and that is such a key part of their lives, is those transitions that they will be experiencing. And so we do need to be intentional about how to include those young people and get, if we have to be online, if we have to be digital, that we can do that and make sure they're included. Many organisations have sought feedback from their users, and that is really good. And it is important that we learn what has worked well and what hasn't, but also that there is a forum to share that learning. And NYCI have been very instrumental in that. There's a need to get skills into the sector and also to get tech into the sector. there is an appetite for training and guidance in relation to IT, and equipping the sector in this way will serve to reduce the stress that Deborah was talking about there. We also need to pay attention to accessibility, particularly for young people with intellectual and other disabilities, and just make sure that we make them make it as inclusive as possible, and make sure they know that they aren't being left behind. All of this comes at a cost, and so we do need to invest financially for all those changes, all the tech kind of introductions, but we also need to invest in people in terms of staff and volunteer capacity for COVID-19. Deb's talked there about the exhaustion. We felt the exhaustion when we were interviewing people. We can't underestimate the impact of the last 6 months on workers, and so we need to invest in the well-being of staff and volunteers. And then lastly, we need to embrace the challenge. We hope that the research has highlighted the innovation, the creativity, the strong will of youth workers to support young people, and we would encourage youth organisations to continue to experiment with different digital methods and try new mediums. So just to finish, I'm going to read this quote from a programme manager. Young people are going to have more needs. They're going to be more complex, and there are going to be more young people in need of our service. This isn't going anywhere anytime soon. It's going to continue to impact on people's lives in some way over the next couple of years. Overall, young people's needs are going to be higher, and youth services are going to be needed more than ever. Advocacy will be vital for the youth work sector in the coming months, particularly regarding funding and investment, technological innovation and ICT infrastructure, and the training for digital skills, and also for becoming COVID-19 compliant. But also that well-being that we were talking about of our youth workers, which will in turn positively impact our young people who will be living with the consequence of this virus well into the future. And it's great to have the Minister here today, and hopefully we can influence the funding that goes into this youth sector to make a difference for young people in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lorraine and Deborah there. I was just having a bit of a technical glitch there. I wasn't sure if I had to unmute myself or somebody else could do it for me. So yeah, what a really informative and insightful overview of the research that you guys conducted. It really is only the tip of the iceberg. We have a summary report, and we have the full report produced by Lorraine and Deborah available on our website if you would like to have, and I would encourage you all to have a deep dive into it. Before we move on, we might just ask Deborah and Lorraine a couple of questions that we've received. I suppose one of the things that the research has shown is that the youth sector has demonstrated a huge amount of flexibility and adaptability in its innovation over the past 7 months. Of the changes in service delivery, what type of activities were received well by the young people at the time that you came across?
What we were hearing, like particularly from the focus groups with young people, was that they really appreciated that youth workers were there for them, and they were aware of that. You know, they knew that those youth workers were, you know, being proactive and kind of reaching out. I remember a young person saying very clearly that, you know, I know that if I run into difficulties, I can just text, and, you know, that my youth worker will be in touch, and they will get me through whatever it is. So that there was that kind of knowledge there. Like we were hearing through some of the youth workers that they could see how, you know, young people and their families really appreciated, you know, the various activity packs and care packages and all of that. They appreciated, you know, youth organisations checking in, so I suppose the other part of it was about the social interaction, and it's kind of interesting because one of the things that we noted in the report, that to a certain extent there was a loss of developmental kind of work in terms of the group work that many youth organisations you know, deliver with young people. I suppose that shifted a little bit. but really there was one of the focus groups that an arts kind of performing arts group, and they obviously then weren't able to rehearse in the same way, and that they weren't doing their kind of dancing and you know, drama stuff, but they were meeting regularly on Zoom, and they said that they really bonded during that time, and so it actually kind of, you know, strengthened their kind of relationships. So the other interesting thing was around all the challenges that took place. You know, people were climbing Everest in their homes and, you know, doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things. And we heard like positive and negative feedback actually of that, mostly kind of positive. And, you know, we could just see how creative organizations were being, but I suppose there was a little bit of fatigue around that for some young people. Sometimes it created a little bit of pressure, and also just the practicalities, particularly if you're in a rural area, just to kind of make some of that stuff happen and for people to feel connected. And sometimes it really kind of relied on family support to make those kinds of things work. But on the whole, you know, that those things were vital to give a sense of togetherness while apart.
Yeah, it seems that the sector kind of pivoted, as you said, away from the delivery of developmental work to actually just offering a space where young people were supported, connected, and where they could communicate with one another as well. And it was kind of facilitated to permit them to do that, even though they're, you know, in their home staying safe, but that they were actually facilitated to meet and actively, constructively engage with one another. We'll just move on to another question. In conducting the research, what were the key areas of support that you identified for youth organisations to enable them and the young people they work with to thrive in this uncertain climate?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be challenging going forward, and what we could see was you know, flexibility is really important, and particularly around funding. So some organizations were quite concerned about the young people that they hadn't been able to connect with or engage with. You know, that there was concerns about, you know, those kind of loss of relationships, and that you know, it takes, you know, relationships take time, and it takes kind of regular kind of work. And so there was a concern just about, you know, how long it would take to build those relations back up. So in that sense, there needs to be some kind of flexibility around funding arrangements, because you can't just, you know, things won't just go back to normal as they were. So all the things around, you know, the investment, the resourcing, the infrastructure, the kind of practical things, and the bigger kind of issues and structures around, you know, connectivity, you know, particularly for rural communities. Also, what we were hearing from organizations was that they could see the benefits of digital kind of methods of youth work, and they were foreseeing, you know, a blended approach, so that there would be, you know, they would be using both. They could see absolutely that the benefits of all of that, and not just from a practical point of view in terms of dealing with COVID-19. So I think there's a real need then to kind of be able to facilitate organizations to offer that kind of blended approach. And so, you know, it's also about the guidance and the compliance, and you know, the advice is really important. And also those kind of networks for youth workers to feel that they are they're not on their own, they're not banging their head against a wall, but, you know, there's other people, and just so that they can connect with others and exchange ideas. All of that stuff is really important.
Very good. What we might do is move on to pose a question to our young people. Actually, we received one there. Maybe we'll put it to Callum first. So the question is, do you think we should do everything we can to make sure we have all our youth services accessible for all our young people for as long as we can keep our young people safe?
So I think it's a great question, and I think it's quite a hard one, because not only do we have to try and balance safety and hygiene, we also have to support young people and support youth workers in the work that they do. So I think it's a two-sided question, that although public health and the health of everyone should be at the forefront of everything we do, we need to be flexible and be able to adapt to every situation, which we have done. And even the term that was used there, I think it was Deborah had mentioned, it was the digital youth worker, is a new one that we hadn't seen. And I'd heard stories of how youth workers had adapted through it by even Mercy had mentioned it, about they'd made Snapchat and Instagram groups, which wouldn't usually be something you do with a youth worker. And as well as that I was speaking to a youth worker from Mead, and they had moved all their one-to-one meetings onto PlayStation. So they'd have a game of FIFA, or they'd have a game of Call of Duty, or whatever game that they wanted to play. And they speak about how things were going, and it helped normalize the situation for young people, and didn't take them into a kind of a Zoom meeting, which can be quite weird because we're sitting in a rectangular box. But at the same time, that it allowed to normalize the situation, talk through what was going on, while also having fun, which is what youth work is all about.
Thank you, Callum. We have one more question for our researchers, and we have time to take maybe one quick question. What do you think can be done to support our young people who are most at risk and those who are not engaging digitally at this time?
Good question. Yeah, because those young people are usually the most marginalised, the most isolated anyway, and so it is really important that we pay attention to those young people. You'll see when you read the research, there were some really good examples where I used the words earlier, the strong will of youth workers, where they did not want to give up on not connecting with those young people. And so there was some really good partnership work came through with social workers and the guards, and making sure that they were joined up. And so I think that's one way to make sure that those networks are all there, that organisations share some of that information to make sure that those young people are not going off the radar. It also sort of, for me, I think one of the interviewees talked about that importance of accessing generic youth work, or, just being open, being there for those young people. And if we don't have that established when times like this come, not that we could have foreseen this, it's very difficult to make those connections. We need to be available. We needed to be available prior to this pandemic. And just make sure that we have a connection with the community. One of the quotes in the report talks about the travelling community, and making sure that you build that respect within that community to be able to make contact. Youth workers used every available opportunity. They were texting, they were phoning, the outreach work continued for some. They got permission from the guards to continue that. They called at people's houses. That persistence really has helped, and I think that needs to continue, that these young people don't go off the radar, but make sure that there's that networking. I think youth workers should be seen as frontline workers, because obviously this wasn't looking at return on investment, but if we can prevent that mental health impact, if we can prevent getting, engaging in some of those antisocial behaviour, well, actually it's going to be an investment, and we need to invest in these young people, because ordinarily they are ignored or go off the radar, and so we need to make that effort.
Yeah, Lorraine, I think you're right, and I think it is that investing now is so important, particularly in that risk and marginalised group of people. And while we're talking about investing and funding, I would like to bring us to our Minister, Roderic O'Gorman. I'd like to thank him for taking the time at what I'm sure is a very busy day to officially launch our review of the youth work sector during the COVID-19 pandemic. So Minister Roderic O'Gorman is Minister for Children, Disability, Equality, Integration and Youth, and he was appointed to this role in June 2020. He was elected to represent the Dublin West constituency in the 2020 election. And he has served on Fingal County Council and was first elected in 2014 and re-elected in 2019, and represents the Green Party. He has been an EU law lecturer, worked in UCD Brexit Institute, and has also served on the board of management for 5 schools. And I think they cover primary and secondary. So I'd like to hand over to our Minister now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Duvasa. Can you hear me okay there? Will you give me a thumbs up? Brilliant, that's great. Thanks very much. Thanks to you, and I'm really grateful to the National Youth Council of Ireland for giving me the opportunity to speak with you all today. And I'd like to thank Caillum and Mercy for giving us the benefit of their own experiences across the last number of months. I know in particular the Bakestown and Mount View Youth Initiative that Mercy's involved in, that's in my own area, and I know the huge support it gives to young people, to children and to their families at all times, but particularly during the crisis. And I think maybe it's important to begin by saying a huge thank you to all the organisations, the youth workers, the projects, the volunteers, for the incredible work that all of them have undertaken to provide services during this time of extraordinary crisis. Now, I came into this department, I suppose, at the very height of the crisis, and immediately I was impressed by the way the entire youth sector had come together to support young people at what's been a really, really difficult time. And look, your determination, your resilience over the last number of months is something that all of you should be immensely proud of. The pandemic has presented and continues to present very real challenges to the provision of youth services. And as I say, the entire sector has responded with positivity, but also real creativity as well. And I think we heard that from some of the examples that Mercy and Caillum give us, but we also see those examples in the report that I'm launching here today. And obviously, in the general run of things, youth services are delivered face to face, and that's the huge benefit from them. And that's how they actually build up those really positive relationships that all youth work is based on. But during the restrictions, obviously, that sort of approach wasn't possible. And those restrictions, whether it's the closure of schools, separation of friends, they've had a real impact on the well-being and on the mental health of young people, and particularly on vulnerable young people. And we know many young people are facing stress now at the moment about education, about employment opportunities, about financial concerns into the long term. And they're experiencing concern, worry, anxiety, and sometimes even there's almost a lack of hope for the future as we see restrictions and that going on. But over the last 6 months, youth services and youth work organisations have innovated to develop and deliver their critical services in diverse and sometimes even in an enhanced way. And many organisations showed that they were really agile by quickly moving online to continue to engage a wide number of young people. And at the same time, crucial outreach and detached services continued throughout the restrictions to reach the most vulnerable young people and their families through socially distanced home visits or the delivery of activity or food packages. And this proactivity in such uncertain circumstances really highlights the hope and the positivity that's prevalent throughout youth work in this country. And this is driven by the youth work sector's impressive dedication and flexibility in facing challenging circumstances and turning them into opportunities in order to best serve the children and the young people that they work with. The sector has really stepped up, and I do want to take the chance today to acknowledge that. And I'm also keen to highlight how representatives of the sector have worked with my department, and not least in the very close partnership that has been developed to create and revise the guidance for youth work organisations. And the latest version of this guidance was published the week before last, and it's always in line with the wider government guidance, and it aims to provide clarity and assurance to those providing youth work services. And the guidance has been continually updated at every phase of the crisis to ensure it matches with public health guidance. My department has continued to fund youth work services throughout the period of restrictions. I was pleased to be able to launch both the new targeted youth funding scheme, UBU, Your Place, Your Space, and the Youth Climate Justice Fund in recent weeks. And I was also pleased to approve funding for capital grant schemes for national and local services, and more recently, additional small capital grants to assist services in the extra costs incurred by COVID-19. As we move from the initial phase of the crisis to managing living with the virus, I am concerned about high levels of youth unemployment and the threats to mental health and well-being that is resultant as of that. And helping young people overcome the unique and significant challenges that they are now facing is a key priority for my department and for the government as a whole. And as we move to address these challenges and create opportunities, it is important to take a step back and just to look and see where we've come from. Because the youth work sector, like so many sectors in this country, grew from the voluntary sector. It was recognised as a specific field in its own right as far back as the 19th century, where it was recognised that young people had an importance and a promise for the future. And in the 1960s, we saw the formalisation of youth structures. And then in 1977, we saw the first national youth policy being established. My own department, initially established as the Office for the Minister of Children, was established in 2005. And in 2008, youth was added to the title to reflect the importance of young people as a distinct group. And I recognise this importance today, and I can assure you that youth issues will always be absolutely central to the work of my department. As you know, and as Duvasa mentioned earlier on, we have continued to include the title of youth within the wider departmental title. And indeed, I don't think I could have faced your CEO, Mary Cunningham, if I hadn't actually made that particular change. But I do hope that move is seen as a clear signal to highlight the importance of young people in society today. I do want to thank all the youth groups who engaged with me when I started on the role, including NYCI, asking that youth be retained in the departmental title. The role of youth work services play in our communities cannot be overstated, and my department is committed to supporting youth services right across the country. And universal provision is absolutely vital to ensure young people have the opportunity to participate should they so wish. And we'll invest in our young people and the services that support them in order to reduce inequality and marginalisation. Now more than ever, it's absolutely imperative that we drive forward in the effort to ensure a more inclusive and a more equal Ireland. And my department puts the young, the vulnerable, the marginalised at the very centre of the work we do. To improve outcomes for young people, I'm committed to a positive working relationship with the youth sector. We will work together on the path to recovery to ensure that young people, especially those who are most at risk, are not left behind. And obviously a key partner in all of this are yourselves in the National Youth Council of Ireland. And as a representative body for youth organisations, NYCI is a critical player in the field, and it is really a privilege to attend today's event and to mark this very important piece of work that the NYCI has undertaken. And I suppose that gets us to the report that I'm launching today, the review of the youth work sector response to the Covid-19 pandemic. And as all the other speakers have mentioned, it comes at a really important juncture in this particular crisis. As we move towards living with Covid-19, it's really important how we understand the issues that affect the provision of youth work to young people. And the importance of youth work for young people during the pandemic is already recognised in international research. And now following on from this research today, we have an evidence-based in the Irish experience as well. And through the survey that was undertaken, through the focus groups, through the interviews, the authors have engaged with young people here in Ireland in a variety of settings, and to be able to learn how the pandemic has actually impacted on their own experience of youth work. And in general, young people are very positive about their experiences of youth work during the pandemic, and they feel that the youth organisations were very quick to respond to their particular needs. The NYCI report highlights a number of opportunities, particularly in relation to the potential and reach of digital engagement. The benefits of online provision are clear. They include greater access and inclusion for young people in rural areas or with poor public transport options. This new virtual pathway makes it possible for more young people, no matter where they live or what challenges they face, to have the opportunity to benefit from the important developmental opportunities that are provided by youth work. However, there are barriers to engaging young people digitally, And as this report highlights, those most at risk are often those who are most disconnected. And as we consider how to adapt for the future, we know that remote contact is not enough to build the relationships that are absolutely essential to effective youth work. And that's why a blended model may represent the best of both worlds, as we retain the best of the traditional features of face-to-face engagement, while retaining the benefits of some of the more innovative online approaches that have been adopted over the last number of months. The positives of such a blended approach emerged in the work undertaken by my department in early summer with the support of national youth organisations who highlighted innovations that emerged as a response to the pandemic, but which have an enduring value and which should be maintained. The blended approach promises to boost inclusion, reach, efficacy and outcomes for children and young people, and it's an approach that my department will continue to support into the future. So I'd like to finish today by thanking Mary, thanking Deborah and Lorraine and NYCI for their efforts in producing such a relevant and timely report. The report puts us in a better position to understand the impacts that COVID-19 has had on young people and on the youth work sector, and enables us as policymakers to make better decisions as we move towards recovery. And the identification of the importance of the blended approach, particularly for those who had problems accessing services even prior to the pandemic, is a particularly significant outcome from this piece of research. The report clearly illustrates, though, how COVID-19 has brought anxiety and uncertainty to our young people. Being young is hard for many, even during the best of times, and for some of our young people, the best of times, they really seem a long way off right now. One of our finest poets, Seamus Heaney, once urged us to believe that a further shore is reachable from here. With the skilled support of youth work organisations, I have great faith that our young people are being ably assisted to navigate these choppy waters as we head towards that much desired further shore. Thank you for inviting me here today to launch this really important piece of research, and I look forward to continuing to work with all of you into the future. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think it's wonderful to hear, you acknowledge the positivity that is there within the sector and also the challenges that we face. Now I'll just hand this over to Mary Cunningham. She is going to reply to yourself, Minister, and also close for us. Mary Cunningham, as you will probably all know, is our CEO here in NYCI and has been since 2002. She is the Vice Chair of the National Children and Young People's Advisory Council and a member of the North-South Education and Training Standards Committee for Youth Work. She's currently on the board of Jigsaw and is chair of their Governance and H4 Committee. Please take the floor, Mary.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Tufasa, and thank you very much, Minister. So good afternoon, everyone. Like Callum, the date of March 12th will be forever etched into my brain. I think that was the day that life as we knew it and took so much for granted changed completely. Initially, the restrictions were due to last until March 29th, but I remember leaving the briefing in the Department of the Taoiseach on the evening of the 11th of March, and I realised that it was going to last much longer than that. But even then, I anticipated that everything would be back to normal by September. As the CEO of one of our member organisations said recently, this is a marathon, not a sprint, but we've all started it as though it is a sprint, and that is not sustainable. Youth workers and youth work volunteers, I think, have been truly inspirational, but they will need investment both for themselves and for the work to keep going. And while the restrictions impacted on each and every one of us, we know that the pandemic is having and will have a very huge impact on young people. Our research shows that whilst every effort is being made to continue to provide vital support services by moving things online, that for some young people there are huge barriers to digital engagement. I think particularly for, as the Minister mentioned, for those young people who, for being young, is hard for so many. The Minister has recognised that while we know that many youth organisations have been able to extend their reach by delivering their services virtually, that we all acknowledge that youth work is not a remote service. Youth work is about building relationships with young people through informal as well as formal contact. And whilst online youth work, I think, is likely to become part of our offer in the longer term, it can never and should never replace face-to-face work with young people. One of the things that particularly struck me when I read the report was the commitment that youth workers had to the young people they worked with, and both Lorraine and Deborah have mentioned that today. They were and are passionately concerned about them, and many went to such lengths to check in on their young people and make sure that they were okay. I think we need no further evidence to prove that youth work is not a job, it is vocation. Youth organisations have been really quick to adapt their services and have also been key to supporting the wider community response. And I think it's really good to have captured that in the research as well. I think as Dufasa mentioned, and as was very evident from what Caillum said, it isn't just about youth work supporting the young person, it's about supporting the young person as a member of their community. We know that COVID-19 will have long-lasting impact on society at large, from the economy to employment to the way we interact with each other. And it has brought about massive and widespread changes to our daily lives and will have long-term consequences for all of us, but especially, I think, for children and young people. There is no denying that government is facing a colossal challenge in the upcoming budget. But it is vital that the youth sector is kept resourced and supported so that we can continue to engage with and support young people now and in the future as we continue to live, work and play alongside COVID-19. It is important in the upcoming budget that the voice of young people and those that support them doesn't get forgotten, so that all young people, but especially the most vulnerable, get the support that they need now and in the future. Much needs to be done in the coming months and years to protect young people from poverty, particularly through unemployment, respond to the needs of every young person, particularly those the most marginalised, keeping young people safe, and to support the mental health and well-being of all young people throughout this crisis. There has never been a more important time for youth organisations and the youth workers that support them, both paid and volunteer, who empower young people to transform their lives. Youth workers were thrown in at the deep end when COVID struck, and they have absolutely stepped up to the plate, as the Minister said. One of the comments in the comment box today said, it should be noted that youth work didn't finish at regular times while doing digital work. It was 7 days a week, often well into the early hours of the morning. But there's no surprise in that. The youth work has always shown resilience, imagination and determination to meet the needs of young people. We pride ourselves on being flexible and adaptable. What has been different this time is that others have noticed it too. And I want to acknowledge the officials in the department who have been working collaboratively with the sector throughout the pandemic. And whilst it was referred to earlier that NYCI produced the roadmap, indeed NYCI was only one player that worked doggedly with the officials in the department to get that roadmap out as quickly as possible. And very much, I think, the Youth Affairs was on the front foot, not just in Ireland, but in these islands in terms of producing a roadmap specifically for the youth sector. So we have been working collaboratively with the officials in the department throughout the pandemic. And the officials, I think, have demonstrated the value and regard that they have for the work that we do. But youth work has been doing great work for years. So we've been hiding in plain sight. So it's very good to have it finally recognised. The confirmation of funding in the Republic of Ireland, and it happening so quickly, was a relief to organisations. There really does need to be a recognition of the limitations of online delivery and the impacts that that will have on targets, both in the current year and in future years. And it's not just here that the value of youth work is being recognised. Meeting recently with colleagues in the Education Authority in Northern Ireland, they talked about how youth workers are finally being recognised as much bigger partners in the lives of young people. They talked about the creativity and innovation, as well as the common sense approach adopted by youth workers and youth organisations in responding to the pandemic. And I believe there's much to be gained by sharing those experiences on a cross-border basis. Our colleagues in Youth Pact are currently finalising a similar piece of research focusing on the Peace 4 funded projects and the work that they did in responding to the pandemic. I think there's a real opportunity now to amplify the role of youth work, to dynamically learn from the experience of the crisis, to explore what new needs exist for both young people and the youth sector workforce. How has our practice been enhanced by COVID? What has the technology enabled in our practice? I believe these questions merit some important reflection, and perhaps that would help by creating the forum that Lorraine mentioned in her input. Finally, I want to say a few thank yous. Firstly, to the excellent team in NYCI who identified the need for this important piece of work, and to the board of NYCI for their courage in supporting the proposal and for agreeing to fund it. I also want to thank NYCI's President Tufasa for chairing today's proceedings. I want to particularly thank my colleagues, Mary-Claire McAleer, who managed the project so skillfully from begin to end, to Daniel Meister for the communications and PR that has enabled such high-level media coverage of the research and of the sector, and to Valerie Duffy and her colleagues in development education who organised the technical side of this webinar. I think things we wouldn't have dreamt of, 7 or 8 months ago now. It's wonderful to have expertise in-house. I want to thank the researchers, Deborah and Lorraine, who not only brought their expertise and experience as researchers to this project, but their passion and belief in the value of youth work as youth practitioners as well. And I think their very practical recommendations are something that we can all focus on to progress for the future. I also want to thank Mercy and Caillum for their inspirational contributions. It is critical that we hear firsthand the voice of young people who will be most impacted by COVID, not just now, but for years to come, and to hear about the efforts of youth workers and volunteers have made to them during this period of time. It's wonderful to hear how deeply they care about the youth organisations that they're members of, how heartbreaking it is to not be able to go to youth groups, to hear about the values that youth work has instilled in them through youth work that has supported them to help in their communities. And to name just two people, Roshan and Cueva, who Mercy mentioned, are very definitely the one good adult that every young person needs in their life. I want to particularly thank the Minister for taking time in his very busy schedule to be with us today. The Minister now has a huge departmental brief, and we really do appreciate you listening to us and adding youth into the title of your department. But we also appreciate you prioritising young people, youth workers, volunteers and youth work today, and hope and know that you will continue that great support that you have shown for youth work in the days, months and years ahead. Lastly, I want to thank all of you for joining us here today. Almost 400 people registered for this webinar from Ireland, North and South, and indeed colleagues from our sister organisation in Scotland also joined us. I think it is a really important piece of work that evidences what youth organisations have done during the pandemic and that demonstrates independently that youth work actually does indeed change lives. Thank you.